This presentation is conducted by LPH Harris that is about a photojournalist called Philip Jones Griffiths who photographed the Vietnam War. Philip Jones Griffiths was born in Rutland, North Wales on the 18th of February 1936. His father, Joseph Griffiths, managed the local London, Midland and Scottish Railway service. His mother, Catherine Jones, was a midwife. Philip was the eldest child alongside two younger brothers, Penry and Gareth. Aged 16, he discovered the joys of picture post and joined Royal Camera Club. Before leaving school, he has gained enough skills to photograph weddings and work as a photographer at the nearby Golden Sands holiday camp. Between the ages of 16 and 18, he learned to take pictures and he once quoted, "I've got all that beautiful landscape stuff out of the way in North Wales and was ready for the rest of the world." Initially, the rest of the world was confined in Liverpool University, where he studied pharmacy. In London, he combined night shifts as a pharmacist with freelance photographic assignments for the Sunday Times, Guardian and Observer newspapers until becoming a full-time photographer in 1961. Many photographs from this period appear in his posthumous volume Recollections, which are displayed in this slide. In the 1950s, Philip left Wales to explore the world. In the 1960s, Philip started travelling the globe. He became a member of Magnum Photos and first travelled to Vietnam. During the 1950s and 60s, the United States fought wars to stop communism. Vietnam had been a French colony since the 1880s. The Vietnamese fought for independence and won in 1954. The country was split into communists, North Vietnam, and non-communists, South Vietnam. Communists in South Vietnam were called Viet Cong. In the early 60s, they tried to overthrow the government. North Vietnam helped Viet Cong. The United States sent military advisors and supplies to help South Vietnam fight the Viet Cong. In 1965, the US sent soldiers to Vietnam. The US troops had better technology and weapons. They had jet bombers, tanks and helicopters. The Viet Cong fought in small groups that hid in the jungle. They controlled most of South Vietnam. Griffiths' images from the Vietnam War are presented in this current slide. In 1968, however, when the Vietnam War had been rumbling on for 12 years, the late January holiday was deliberately chosen by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong forces as a date to launch a coordinated attack on more than 100 cities and outposts in South Vietnam. It was an attempt by the North to inspire a rebellion of the South Vietnamese people that would force back the scale of the United States involvement. Although the US and South Vietnamese sustained heavy losses, they did achieve a victory, but the huge numbers of casualties sustained, and the shocking news coverage that Americans saw turned public opinion on the war and ultimately marked the beginning of the slow withdrawal of American forces by the region. The Welsh photographer documented the war in Vietnam from 1966 to 1971 and was present for the Tet Offensive and subsequent fallout. While the papers included details of government concerns that the war was unwinnable at the time, they were publicly positive about the war. Philip Jones Griffiths' own writing on the situation revealed an insight on seemed to echo, which was what the US government would seem to have known. Vietnam Inc. was crucial in changing public attitudes in the US, turning the tide of opinion and ultimately helping to put an end to the Vietnam War. Griffiths' classic account of the war was the outcome of 3 years reporting and is one of the most detailed services of conflict, showing us true horrors of the war as well as the study of Vietnamese rural life. He creates a compelling argument against dehumanizing power of the modern war machine against American policies. The book has become one of the enduring classics of photojournalism and is now available in this new edition of Vietnam Inc., which is careful recollection of original Philip Jones Griffiths' personal layouts and commentaries. Through his affecting images of the war, which represent such devastating scenes of family members with dead and injured loved ones, child victims, fleeing families, and portraits of American military with haunted expressions on their dramatic young faces, he built a picture of the war that only someone so deeply entrenched within it could, and his reflective, devastating writing unpicked the disconnect he identified between what was communicated with the US government and the plan he saw playing out before his eyes. By the time Vietnam Inc. was republished in 2001, it had come to be one of the most detailed on-the-ground reportages of the region during the war. Griffiths' insight not only humanised the conflict, but was proved to be accurate assessment of the situation. More images of Vietnam Inc. are displayed in this current slide. Philip Jones Griffiths died aged 72 of cancer. He was the most impassioned and clear-headed of anti-war photographers. From 1966 to 1968 and again in 1970, he lived the Vietnam War from the inside, sharing the conditions of soldiers and civilians, putting himself in immense personal risk. At the time of his death, he was fully engaged in fresh projects. He had also just completed a new book of recollections, images of British daily life from the 1950s to the 1970s. In his mind, he repeatedly returned to Wales, that small country once so brutally colonised by the English that he claimed the experience helped him to identify with oppressed countries everywhere. Philip Jones Griffiths was one of the ultimate photojournalists of history. He was one of the instrumental forces to change the public opinion on American public to be more anti-war in Vietnam. Griffiths believed that the camera is mightier than the sword. Philip Jones Griffiths taught people to challenge their anger into something positive and productive. He once quoted, "I attempt to channel my anger into a tip of my forefinger as I press the shutter." He also taught us that people trust pictures and that photography has a great power. He stated, "People believe pictures. It's a photograph that's in your passport, not a painting." Now, George Bernard Shaw said, "I should exchange every painting of Christ for one snapshot," and believed that what is power of photography is. Time magazine once quoted in 1972 that Vietnam Inc. by Philip Jones Griffiths is the best work of photo reportage of the war as ever published. There is effectively no argument. The book set entirely new standards for critical judgment of the medium and photo reportage. Another quote, wrote by the New York Times in 1971, once said, "Philip Jones Griffiths' work is the closest we are ever going to come to definite photojournalistic essay of the war." Again in 1971, the New Statesman said, "Of all the hundreds of books about South Vietnam, this is the truest, the most important, and the most upsetting."